Hi, everyone. I think we'll get started now. This panel was supposed to kick off at 12, so we're a few minutes over. So in the interest of everyone's time, we'll get started here. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Lucy Hargreaves. I lead global corporate affairs and climate policy for Patch, which is a carbon market software platform based in San Francisco. We're building the digital infrastructure to help grow the carbon market and connect the supply and demand side and encourage market acceleration with high integrity. So I'm excited here today to join these incredible panelists to have a bit of a conversation about how we can use digital infrastructure in the carbon markets to ensure greater integrity. We've got Brian DiMarino with us, a Deputy Director of Global Sustainability with JP Chase. Mark Kember, CEO of the Voluntary Carbon Markets Integrity Initiative. Fiona Mugambi, Chief of Staff and Partnerships Lead for Octavia Carbon, based in Kenya. Antti Vehavinen with Puro Earth, CEO of Puro Earth. And Rob Niven, who is the CEO of Carbon Cure. So thank you all for joining. We know that scaling the climate solutions we need to achieve our global climate goals will require integrity and scalable solutions to navigate an increasingly complex landscape of requirements. We've had VCMI, ICVCM, several governments come out recently with standards, regulations. We know that buyers in the space are increasingly trying to navigate complex and sometimes incoherent standards, and we really believe that digital infrastructure is actually going to be the way that we can knit all of these different systems and requirements together to really help get to the scale that we need. We all know that we need about 10 billion tons of carbon removed from the atmosphere by 2050, and we're not going to get there with Excel spreadsheets alone, as much as we might love Excel. So maybe to kick it off, I will ask you, Brian, a little bit about, from a buyer's perspective, would love for you to share a little bit about the challenges that you experience as a buyer interacting with the market and interacting with some of the standards, and just kind of get your high-level thoughts on what you see the needs for from a digital infrastructure perspective and what the opportunities are there.
Sure. First of all, as a nearly 2-decade vet of finance, Excel can do a lot, but it probably can't do this. Fair enough. So JP Morgan this year, gosh, it's still the same year, but this year we committed to $200 million of carbon removal through engineered solutions, and historically have been buying nature-based offsets since probably 2004. Or thereabouts. So we have a pretty long-standing history of access in the voluntary carbon markets. I think some of the things that we struggle with in this market is that it is great that there are so many bodies that are trying to design and develop the answers to what high integrity looks like. That's great. I think a lot of them are actually probably more focused on the supply side. So what does high quality, high integrity supply look like? I think what's important from a buyer's perspective is that we are using voluntary carbon credits in a high integrity way. And so I think there's a lot of ways in which, whether it's upscale digital registries or better due diligence or things like that, where we can access something that is real time and fast to make decisions to move forward quickly. Because I think what tends to be a struggle for us is if we want a market to move quickly, if it takes us months or even weeks to make a decision on the projects we want to support and invest in, then we're probably not going fast enough. And so we have to find ways to sort of grease the skids a little bit here, get buyers a bit more comfortable with what they're buying when they're buying it, and the pricing. I think that's another big piece, being in the finance industry. We've got to get better and faster price discovery into these markets. And once we do that, I do think we'll see it move a bit faster. But digital solutions are going to go a long way to solving the problem.
That's great, thanks. And I would love to, I think we'll come back to the buyer's perspective in a few moments, but from a supply perspective, I'd love to hear a little bit from you, Fiona, and Rob, just kind of what are you seeing as project developers in the space, I know you face a lot of complexities from sort of third-party verification requirements, keeping track of your inventory, making sure you're staying on top of standards in different regions that we know are evolving rapidly. So yeah, I would love to hear, maybe kick it off with Fiona first, and then go over to Rob to hear sort of from your experience what you're seeing.
Yeah, lovely to be here, Lucy. Thank you so much for that question. I think for us, as early project developers, I mean, just from our experience, you get the first customer, you're over the moon, you're excited. Second customer, you're still dancing. Third customer, you need to pull up an Excel sheet and start tracking these carbon credits, the sales you're doing. And then you get to your 20th and you realize there's so much data you need to handle and it becomes quite complex. So the question now comes like, which software can really put some efficiencies here to really remove some of the burdens we are experiencing here? And that's where, Auntie with Patch, they really come in, and who we are working with here with their Carbon OS platform, which has very high carbon accounting standards. You have very little double counting, and we trust these people. And because they can focus on building the software, we can focus on building the hardware in the world's best place to do so. And this just allows us to advance our technologies to get to the billion-ton scale removal.
Thank you very much. We also use a software platform as well with Patch to help us with the inventory. But what I really wanted to talk about was, as more and more buyers are looking for that kind of committed credits, and they're looking at longer-term offtakes with very specific delivery schedules, where I see the real frustration right now that I believe that digital can help us with is just to accelerate that process of verification, so that we can get through this process of generating. In our case, we generate VCUs, so it's more predictable, it's faster, because at the end of the day, we are the ones who are responsible for conveying these certificates in time, and if we don't do that, these deals can go away. And we're trying to tighten this up as much as we can so that we're generating just in time. And if we're missing dates because certain parties are not able to manually run their process for whatever reason, the whole thing falls apart, and it's really difficult to build a business without having that kind of predictable schedules that we really need, and so do our buyers.
And how are you doing verification right now?
Well, our verification, we do according to various methodology. And we went through that process of developing that with them. We invested a lot into digital infrastructure early on. One of our main investors is Amazon, and we worked with the AWS team to develop that sort of IoT data extraction of all the 800 systems in the field in 35 countries. So we're extracting all that data, cloud computing to run it through that verification process internally, and then we hand it over to the verifier. And then it's a big black hole. And like it shows up in 6 months, maybe 9 months, 12 months. And then it's really frustrating. We need to tighten that up. Weeks would be wonderful. If we're dealing in months right now, and it's hard.
Yeah. And for those of you who may not be familiar, so the software tool that both Fiona and Rob were referring to is Carbon OS, which is Patch's software platform that a lot of project developers are using to kind of, from an end-to-end perspective, manage their inventory, keep track of the credits that they're generating, and keep track of sort of future inventory, and then provide all the sales tools that those project developers need to integrate with other systems, get the credits to market, and kind of keep track of all of the various different attributes that you need to as part of that process. Fiona, did you have something else you wanted to add? It looks like you've got something to say there.
No, I mean, I think it's just very interesting. I mean, we have all these interesting players, and if we just let folks do what they're very good at, I mean, it will really get us to where we need to scale. I mean, we need to scale. And if you have very robust backend software, with Patch on our side, it just allows us to really focus on our hardware. Sorry, that was just the most burning point for me, yeah.
Okay, great. Auntie, would love to hear a little bit from you about Puro. So Puro was founded 6 years ago. And so you've kind of been operating in this space for a while. How have you seen this industry and the infrastructure that supports it change over that time? And what do you see sort of evolving over the next few years?
Yeah, thank you. Indeed, Puro is a organization that develops methodologies and runs a certification framework and then a registry and of course other infrastructure related to carbon removals specifically. We only do carbon net negative methodologies and operations certification. Well, it's not like we started without digital. I mean, pen and paper and carrier pigeons. We started with.
No, there was no carrier pigeons in the
we
history
started
of Puro?
with Excel and email. Actually, right from the first trade back in 2019, there was already, of course, the tracking of the ownership, which was based on a registry that we had loaned from Guarantees of Origin framework. So this is not like we are doing things for the first time within carbon markets. We can we can not reinvent the wheel. That's okay. We can, be a lot quicker. So we actually developed our first experiment from scratch in 71 days by coming up with new methodologies, but the rest of the things were sort of tried and tested. Now, throughout the years, of course, we've added different kinds of platforms for onboarding suppliers, and then, going ahead with the verification. We are definitely seeing the need for additional infrastructure there, especially for the MRV or DMRV part. So that's something that we are going to further develop our sort of supplier portal. So, in an ideal world, of course, it would be sensors, flow sensors that are tracking the injection rate of the CO2 into a well, and that triggers, automatically or semi-automatically the creation of a cork or CO2 removal certificate, which then is, available for trading through an API with the patch platform, for example. So that is definitely where we are going. We are investing in that and partnering with different companies that are in the same ecosystem. When it comes to inventory management, there's one core data point that is needed that we also supply through our API, which is how many corks, how many credits there are today, right now. That is, it's our job to be the single source of truth for that. So that's what we provide, and other people can build their solutions on top of that.
That's great. Yeah. I really love what you've done at Puro and how rapidly you've sort of scaled that seamless system. Mark, it's been a big day for VCMI. I know you had a big announcement this morning with a couple of the other standards bodies, so congratulations on that. If you have anything more to share on that or you'd like to do a recap, feel free to do that here. But I know, you personally and VCMI as well has spent a lot of time in the standards space over the last couple of years focused on how to enable companies to make robust climate claims and giving them sort of a little bit of a playbook on how to think about that. And I'm curious, so I know you're not a technical expert in digital infrastructure, so I don't expect you to weigh in on anything too technical, but I would love to hear from you, what you're hearing today from the panel. Does it resonate with you? Do you see opportunities from the conversations you're having on leveraging digital infrastructure to make carbon markets more accessible for the participants who want to make claims? And how do you see that kind of rolling out?
Thanks, Lucy. And just for the audiences, so that you understand, I sent a message to Lucy about 2 weeks ago saying in large capitals that I can't even turn my phone on, so don't ask me about digital infrastructure. But I do know about carbon markets and integrity. And I think, just the event that Lucy was referring to was that one of the challenges that many buyers or many actors in this market have spoken about, and I guess this would resonate with Brian, is that the standards for corporate action are not joined up. They seem to talk at cross purposes. they obfuscate rather than clarify. And this morning we had a panel on stage where Greenhouse Gas Protocols, Science-Based Targets Initiative, VCMI and ICVCM all spoke from the same hymn sheet. We had a nice video, interesting video, showing how we all fit together, what we do, and we all pledged to continue working together in 2024 so that corporates, at the most simple level, only have to provide one set of disclosure information, not 4 different things to 4 different organizations. But beyond that, that there is a seamless path for a corporate to calculate its inventory, set targets, see how the role of carbon credits fits into that transition pathway and what carbon credits should be used. But that makes things easier. But if you believe like I do, and I think it's certainly the same for ICVCM, that if we want to scale this market to really deliver on its full potential, we need to build trust, and what underpins trust is integrity, and what underpins all of that is real radical transparency. People need to be able to know what others are buying, what they're buying, where does it come from, who's using it, what was the share of proceeds, all the information that, Antti, I'm sure you have in your registry, and that needs to be not only available to the buyers and the sellers, but it needs to be available to the journalists and to the general public, and in particular the communities who are either hosting or affected by projects. And this is where this digital piece comes in, because it's been, we've all sung from that hymn sheet of transparency and participation, and that's what will build the trust. But it hasn't been easy to do. And as anyone who's been in the market, like many of us here for a long time, where it's peaks and troughs, it's quite daunting to invest in something that is complex, hard to manage, and importantly expensive without knowing where the market's going to develop. But with the digital tools, I can see not only does that transparency become much easier, I think, and you'll tell me if I'm wrong, it's actually cheaper as well. You can build the system and then you can add on to it rather than having to create a system, mothball it, realize it was out of date, try and build it again. So I think this is where digital comes in, and it's both on the supply side, the quality of projects, but also importantly on the demand side. If we are saying, and this has got to be the watchword for 2024 and beyond, that companies should not only be setting really ambitious internal emissions reduction targets, but should also be investing in carbon credits, we need to be able to see that those 2 things are complementing each other, not substituting for each other, that we're driving more ambition. And the digital technologies that we're talking about can provide that information to everybody across the value chain in a way that builds that transparency, the integrity, the trust, and then hopefully the scale.
How does that sound to you, Brian? Having an automated way to submit reports to 4 or 5 different organizations rather than having to do that manually 4 times over.
Regulators, right? Like publicly traded companies and even some private companies, like everything we have to do has to be verified and assured and reassured and accounted for and reported and disclosed and then reported again and then rechecked. And so the more you have a digital footprint or a digital sort of chain of custody that you can go back to and point to and say, this is how it happened and why we believed in it, even if, right? So I think the other thing we struggle with a lot in this space is if there's a leakage event or if a project, we've seen this a lot in the nature-based space, if a project is found to be not as impactful as it was meant to be. First of all, we should take a step back and ask ourselves whether or not, if the true intention of the project developers is to do something right, we should stop, destroying their reputation because something didn't go right or because they got something wrong. This is a very complicated space, and whether it's engineered or nature-based removals or avoidance for that matter, it's complex. And so I think having digital tools gives people comfort in the value chain and in the product, but it also gives the buyer something to point to say, at the point of the trade or the purchase or the transaction, this was the information that we had that gave us the comfort to move forward with that product. And so I think that's really, really important from a buyer's perspective. Again, to be able to move a bit quicker. And by the way, when I said weeks, that's because even after you produce a project or product, get it registered and to the market, we then go and do diligence again because we're still not, we still haven't created that infrastructure where the buyer can trust everything. We want to be able to, but it's our reputation on the line. And if we're found to have done something wrong or to have purchased a product that doesn't have the impact that it should, then we're held accountable. And so that's my point about, buyers need to also act with integrity in how they use these things. Producers need to act with integrity about what they produce. And then everyone in the value chain in the middle has to make sure that that gets from, from cradle to grave ultimately, or to retirement.
Trust is everything, really, at the end of the day.
Yeah, but trust but verify, unfortunately, is where we are. We'd like to get past that.
Yeah, yeah. Rob, maybe back over to you. So we've discussed sort of a lot about the inefficiencies in the day-to-day running of operations and businesses. We've talked about Excel spreadsheets. Maybe just looking to the future, like how would you want to see the role of digital infrastructure evolving? Like what does best in class look like in your mind? Where would you like to get to?
Well, with my company, Carbon Cure, we produce we produce technology that provides low carbon concrete. Provides a reduction and removal impact. And I say that because I'm seeing for technologies and projects like ours that are creating low carbon products, there's alternative pathways to monetize those carbon attributes. And we've seen that happen with renewable energy, SAF, and many other products. And these kinds of book and claim or chain of custody models, I think are really interesting as a parallel path and provide some more optionality to be able to monetize those benefits so that we can remove green premiums and really accelerate these technologies from scale or to scale. Going back to the topic at hand, as I feel that we're going to need those digital infrastructure pieces as well, and I think as we're developing this digital infrastructure for the voluntary carbon market and credits, is we should also be thinking about that ability to provide the same kind of transparency and trust that we're looking for to be able to support those kinds of applications as well. That's using a lot of the same data, the same sensors that we're being pulled from and running it through oftentimes the same methodologies as well, that we're able then to use those for different products, if you will. So I think that is a really exciting opportunity for companies that are creating products like SAF and low carbon concrete and electrons.
And Fiona from Octavia Carbon would love to get your perspective on that as well.
Yeah, maybe if I can just put more light on what Brian and Mark have just said about trust. And I think it's something we just see so much of on the supply side. And for us, it's because there's no certainty that, demand is actually going to be there, and demand is always, it's going to grow. I mean, with BCG, what do they say? It's going to be 2 to 5 times bigger than the supply side. But how do we know this? How do we create that trust also from our side? And, if the demand side want to check in, on, for example, maybe Octavia, we are deployed in the world's best place to do so. And that's miles away from, where US is, UK is. It's very, very far. How are they sure that, with this carbon credit, it's high quality, it has gone through the right MRV processes. And for them, what they just want to know, it's that kind of verification. And I think the role of digital infrastructure is just to ensure that, there's proper accounting of this thing, proper accounting for these carbon credits. There's, they've been monitored, reported, and verified in the most proper way, with Puro. And for digital infrastructure to solve that kind of trust, to come in and just, because, we see there's no trust, but they're the guys who are just going to put their trust out there. And for our suppliers, we're just going to really work hard on advancing our technology. So for us, the biggest inefficiency we see is that we really lack that kind of certainty. We lack that kind of assurance that, demand is going to be there when we finish our pilot plant. Yeah.
Yeah. I'd like to kick it over to Antti now to talk a little bit about this integration piece. And I know Puro and Patch are integrated. You mentioned it earlier in your remarks. And just to dive in on that a little bit more, I mean, Puro recently launched the first to-market API for a registry. Could you talk a little bit about that and other ways as a registry you're adapting to kind of the changing requirements in the space that are kind of impacting all of our businesses?
Yeah. So Puro is a subsidiary for NASDAQ. And that helps us understand a little bit about the sort of requirements and dynamics of what does it take to make a good market. And there are, of course, a number of factors that contribute to that. But one thing is that we should, of course, reduce the friction when doing different kinds of trades. We should, of course, try to harmonize the climate impact, i.e., they sort of commoditize the unit itself. I think that is one of the jobs that we, as a standard, have. And that's the reason for existence for us. I think we, the standards, should do our job well enough that the need for sort of any further due diligence from the buyer's perspective should be minimized. Now, I think that's something that we strive to get to. Of course, we've wanted to make that happen, and one of the things that is required for that is, of course, to have a sort of common set of requirements from somebody, sort of a meta standard kind of a level. But that has to be sufficiently high. Now, we are, of course, as probably all the other standards as well, are in the process of applying for the ICVCM CCPs. And they are good in many respects, but I still see there's a lot of room for continued improvement or continuous improvement on that. And we like to sort of take part in that process very actively. And that, of course, will be reflected in the how the market functions. API, yes, it's an important part of reducing the friction. Instead of a carrier pigeon, we rather like to use a machine-to-machine interface. We'd like to sort of prevent the fragmentation of the liquidity pools. It's already damn small, Everybody who is issuing a few thousand credits and then, giving some of that to Patch for sales and some of that to some other marketplace for sales, it's just very cumbersome to get to any significant figures. So those are the sorts of things that we can help and influence by making, for example, enabling the supplier to choose to offer certain credits to be sold through multiple marketplaces, for example.
Yeah, Mark, I saw you had your hand up there a little bit.
I was thinking about sort of a cri de coeur for the poor carrier pigeons that are being displaced by AI like everybody else, but it was more about the ICVCM process. As well as running VCM, I am on the board of ICVCM. So I think you're absolutely right, Antti, about you need to see improvements, and that's, I think you'll see in the documentation that the standards that have been put out this year are just the first step. Yeah. There are continuous improvement working groups across a whole load of issues, Paris alignment, digitalization, et cetera, which the market actors as well as other stakeholders are invited to participate in. So, I think one of the challenges we've had across the market is that we set standards 10 years ago and thought, okay, that's the standards done, and didn't take into account that technology will change, knowledge will change, whole new sectors will come on board, and that's perhaps part of the reason we're seeing a lot of the criticism we are at the moment. So I think one lesson from that is we have to think about continuous improvement. We can't change the rules backwards. We need to give good signals when the rules are going to change. We need to engage all those who are acting in and affected by the market. And again, this goes back to the theme of this panel, that digital technology, especially on the communication side, can really help feed in information so that rather than having moments where the project is perfect and the next day it's suddenly a crime against humanity, it actually becomes, okay, we need to improve this, and we can do that continuously at the project level by communicating with the stakeholders involved, and then go back to that issue of trust and integrity.
And Brian, maybe just to pick up on that trust conversation, like having some sort of what would it take for a JP Morgan to not have to do all the due diligence that you're currently doing? Like what would you like to see in a meta standard? What more do you need to see from, the ICVCMs of the world so that you can kind of feel more confident that what you're getting is what you're getting and you don't have to run your kind of additional 6-month due diligence process before you decide?
I should be very clear. Like, we trust the ICVCMs and the Puros and the Patches and everyone, like the Octavia. We trust the people and the integrity of what they're trying to do. I think what we're still managing is the sort of, I'll call them the external stakeholders from this market, right? Like this is a really cool and like nice feedback loop being in rooms like this where we get to like talk to people who know what we're saying and they're like, yeah, totally, we agree with you. But then when we actually take action and it's in a newspaper or one of our shareholders starts asking questions or things like that, we have to then go and effectively justify what we're doing. And so I think as long as the broader population is not as well educated on these topics, we're going to continue to have to do that work to make sure that we don't trip, because as soon as we do, we will lose 2 years of progress from our perspective, not the markets. But we've got a lot of space to run. I mean, if you had asked me if JP Morgan would make the types of investments we've made in the carbon markets, and we've supported private placements for Climeworks and for Savante, and like we're really pushing to get into these markets and help move them forward, and the technologies underneath them. But if you'd asked me like 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, if we were to do that, I probably would have said probably not. And now we're this far ahead. And so the second that there's a little bit of like unsettled ground, I think it slows us down. And that's what we're trying to avoid. So I am happy to continue to do that extra diligence, and we'll spend the extra few weeks and a couple of months to do it for now. But I think what everyone's building is the right stuff. We just need sort of the world at large to start to understand this stuff a bit better.
Market education, super key. Yeah. Okay, Mark, I have one last question for you, and then maybe we'll go to the panelists for any sort of final remarks or thoughts, and then I think we'll open it up to the floor for a little Q&A. So, Mark, what does VCMI have planned over the next year or so to continue on your path to improving integrity in the markets? What should we be looking out for?
A small team of carrier pigeons, and we published a week ago, we published the carbon integrity claims and the MRA framework, so companies can now make claims using a combination of their own decarbonisation and carbon credits, and they should do so. This is going to have value in the market, it shows leadership, and it's a way of separating those who have been green-hushing but doing the right thing from those who may have been greenwashing. And so that's the first step. Second, we published a beta version of a claim which allows companies to use carbon credits to meet part of their Scope 3 objectives, their Scope 3 science-aligned targets. Now, this has been controversial, as you can imagine, but it's driven by research that we've done that shows that nearly 3/4 of companies are having trouble meeting their Scope 3 targets. But at the moment, if they don't meet them, they go, okay. Or they don't take on the target in the first place, because why would they do it if they can't meet it? So we're experimenting. It's a beta version. We invite all those who are working in this space to work with us to see, have we got the numbers right? Have we got the guardrails right? It's supposed to be a way to drive ambition, bring more companies on to taking in action, taking both internal action and investing in carbon markets. And we'll continue to develop that throughout 2024. We hope to launch the final version in Q3, but that relies on people here, people in this room, people around working with us, because there are some technical challenges, some of which can be solved using the technology we're talking about here. Some require deep thinking and how do we understand what company pathways look like and how carbon credits can credibly, with high integrity, play a role in smoothing out those pathways. So that's something to work on with us this year. But I think at the heart of all VCMI's claims and the guidance for corporate engagement with the voluntary carbon markets is this idea that internal decarbonisation and use of carbon credits have to go hand in hand. One cannot be a substitute for another. And it's not just the integrity at the end, at either end, at the supply and the demand, across the whole value chain. So we know, anyone who's been here knows that we need to phase out fossil fuels. And so that has to be part of the agenda. We know that we have a whole bunch of things around energy efficiency, renewables. We can't say, someone else will do that, we're going to invest in carbon markets. No, that has to be a core part of it. And I think, when we talk about trust and integrity, that's where we come from. We believe in scaling carbon markets, but only if they do so on the basis of integrity.
Yeah, that's a super important point. And then also just to pick up on where you're going with the claims code, we are in our digital infrastructure at Patch actually building out in our product an automated reporting tool. So for companies that are making a VCMI claim, they'll have access to basically a one-click report that they can generate that will give them all of the information to automatically submit to VCMI so that you can be confident that they meet their requirements that you're setting out for what high integrity looks like from a carbon credit perspective. We're also doing the same with Bill 1305 requirements in California. So, and we'll continue to do the same as more regulations and standards roll out, because it shouldn't be hard for a company to demonstrate that they're in compliance. That shouldn't be an onerous sort of step that they have to spend many days and weeks kind of compiling information for. It should just be something that they can click and access and then automatically report on. Before we head over to the audience for Q&A, any last thoughts, Brian, Fiona, Antti? I think Antti's got his hand up there. Rob?
Perhaps one thing that I cannot avoid saying in when I have the chance is that if there are any buyers or likely potential buyers in the audience, it's better to start early than wait. Why is that? Well, today when you go to talk to Fiona, you are one of the earlier customers, and it's probably a good conversation. Or of course, Rob, for that matter, you are much more mature, of course, but you are in the. Oh, anyway, the point is, so there's different kinds of assistance that you can get through your pathway. So the point is that if you need this much competence, you can partner differently based on your internal level of competence and willingness to invest in this. There are different kinds of intermediaries. Some of them are just transactional. Some of them curate portfolios. Some of them advise. Some of them take your money and just take care of it on your behalf. So figure out what is the best way forward for you, and then charter out those sorts of partnerships and start developing the pipeline, either directly with a supplier or entirely through an intermediary. These options exist for every single type of a organization. So it's not a question of that; it's a question of getting started. So and if you don't get started, you won't have any supply when you need it.
Rob, last words?
Certainly a supply-constrained market right now of high-quality credits, for sure. Just to summarize things, we need transparency, we need action. The one thing we don't have is time with climate change, and we can't keep having transparency constrain action on climate. And this is where we need people like you at Patch to develop the infrastructure so that we don't have to compromise.
I think that's a great place to end it. Thanks, Rob. Any questions from the floor? I think we have a roaming mic somewhere from Aida. Could we bring that over, please? Thank you. We'll try.
Thanks. Chris from Mitsubishi Corporation. We develop large-scale CDR projects and also run a facility called Nexion, procuring CDR offtakes. And happy to share, we're also an investor to Robert's company, CarbonCure. I have a question to Brian. You talked about reputation. You talk about educating the market. I'd love to hear a bit more. When you talk about reputation, what are the items that you look into when you select these offtakes to mitigate this reputational risk?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So first of all, we actually published a white paper in May of this year on what we view as sort of high integrity and how we access the market. It's not that different from what ICVCM and VCMI and others are saying you should be looking at, right? We're looking at things that can be measured, that are, have strong and secure baselines, that are verifiable, that are additional. We all know the buzzwords. I think what's important is that buyers and suppliers and everyone across the value chain is continuing to say those things over and over and over again. And I can't tell you how many times I've reiterated into a microphone the 8 attributes that we look for in a high integrity credit, right? Which are all the same things that everyone else is saying. But if we don't say them over and over and over again until we're blue in the face and ready to pass out, people aren't going to hear them, right? Everyone needs to hear it, and they need to hear it over and over and over again. And so we're going to continue to do that. But like that's what we need to see, right? We just need to know that these projects are having the impact that they're meant to have. And as long as that's happening, we're going to support them. And you know, we've been very clear about that. And I know other buyers in the space have been clear about that. And you know, I think one of the things I truly enjoy about what we get to do in this space is working with project developers who truly in their hearts are trying to do something great. And you know, we're just a buyer. Like all we do is write the check. They do the hard work. And I think that for me, what comes before all of those attributes is that we're working with people who are truly trying to change the world. And I think that that is what this is all about. It's what this market's about. It's what COP is about. It's what these conversations are about. It's about actually trying to do something that's really impactful and meaningful. And it's sometimes you can forget that in the middle of like, you know, a 7-month contract negotiation or like, you know, a multi-year due diligence or registration process. But we're all here trying to do something really, really great. And so we're just going to keep saying that stuff over and over. And I know that you guys know at Mitsubishi and at NextGen what high integrity looks like. So I'm sure you'll repeat all the same stuff.
Thanks.
Sure.
Yes.
Grégoire Baillargeon. I'm with BMO, Bank of Montreal. We're owners of BMO Radical, also very active in the credit markets, and a buyer like JP Morgan of high quality credits, Carbon Cure, Carbon Engineering as well. The role of government. So if we fast forward 2-3 years out, what kind of support do we get from governments? Anywhere from, of course, on the policy side, you know, contract for differences, but also on the regulation and integrity, and maybe potentially also as buyers. I mean, they could be showing the example as much as large corporates are trying to show the way. Could the government be a buyer for high quality credits, showing how to use them properly and how to talk about offsets in your overall plan? So
I have maybe two first thoughts that I'll kick off with, having spent a long time in government myself. And as part of my role at Patch, leading a lot of our conversations with elected officials and decision makers within government. So I think there's two things, and I would love to hear from the other panelists, but there's two things that are top of mind for me. One is leading by example. I mean, we know governments probably are not going to start writing a bunch of regulations articulating exactly what the standards should be, but they can lead by example from a procurement perspective, and we're seeing that in the US with the Department of Energy, and I think that can be a very strong market signal to private sector buyers. And then the second thing that I would love to see, and I know, Mark, you might have more to say about this as well, is for governments to endorse the VCMI claims code as a way for corporations to think about their path to net zero. We saw the same happen with climate risk disclosures, with TCFD, that many governments took that voluntary disclosure mechanism and started over the next few years after that rolled out, started referring to TCFD aligned reporting in regulation, legislation, and other sort of policy frameworks. And I would love to see something similar happen with VCMI claims code.
any signs of that happening, actually?
So yes, I would. Surprisingly, I agree with you, and there are signs that are happening in different ways. And I think it's not only the endorsement of VCMI's work and ICVCM's and others, which I think we may see an announcement by a government today recommending that. Certainly, I'm talking about a buyer country government. The governments in host countries are already. I mean, if you look at our website, the number of countries that endorsed our launch of our claims code earlier this week, they want. Many countries want this framework to work because they're looking for investment, and I'm sure this is as true in Kenya as it is anywhere else in the world. But it's also thinking about how does this form part of the glide path to regulation. So a lot of what's in our claims code set on the demand side should be regulated when we're trying to create the basis for regulation. And it's interesting, Lucy, you mentioned TCFD. We think all the disclosure requirements about how carbon credits are used, what they're used for, what they are, should be part of regular financial disclosures. Obviously, if a company says, and we are a climate leader, emissions neutral, carbon neutral, climate superhero, whatever it has to be, people in the public, not just the people in this room, need to know what that means. So if you're going into a supermarket and you're buying a yogurt that says this is climate superhero and this one's emissions neutral, I don't know what it means, and I bet no one else doesn't. Those should be regulated. You know, like food standards, there should be consumer protection and advertising standards. That is the role of government. It's not about trying to think, how do we regulate the whole market? Because as we know from the processes happening over there, they take a really long time and they don't always get it right. They're the product of political negotiations. And what we buy as products and our assurance that they're high quality should not be the result of political negotiations that be based on science, technical expertise, and the ability to improve over time. So I think it's both government endorsement, but also and that pathway to regulation. But I think probably especially in the technological removal space, there's a lot more that government could do, either requiring it or procuring it themselves, providing guarantees. I'm just opening the door for you to answer that question better.
Yeah, thanks. Well, we've been advocating in the European Union context that some of the twofold. First of all, yes, the emission allowance as a buyable thing is a bit absurd because who can give that allowance for emitting any more with the concentration so high? That's a challenging concept. So at least what should happen is that there should be a quota, a minimum and possibly a maximum quota, say a few percent of the emissions for companies within the emission trading scheme should be covered by buying removals. And the rest, the 98%, that revenue goes to governments. A part of that revenue should be targeted to purchases of carbon removals from within their host country, from that country, because that will generate a demand signal within that country, and therefore that will eventually generate an industry that hopefully will be sort of exporting carbon removals to other countries in the medium to long term.
Brian?
Sorry, far be it for me not to comment on a question about government policy. Look, I think there's a lot of great work actually happening in the public sector on this space. I mean, Canada actually is a great example. I'm pretty sure there's like a capital subsidy for developing like carbon removal, like 65% or something. Like those things are great. But what I found is a lot of subsidies right now are really trying to support supply. And there is not enough demand yet in the market, right? And we've talked about it a couple of times now, but there isn't enough demand for the supply that could be built, right? The pipeline of supply is actually quite large. Go talk to any producer of, high quality engineered carbon removal. They're ready. They're ready to, copy and paste their facilities and make them bigger, and they've got the plans and they've thought through it and they understand the economics. The demand isn't there yet, and so I think we need to see more support on the demand side. And to be honest, I'm not sure even what that looks like, but you got to figure out what it is buyers are nervous about. And one of the things they're nervous about right now is there's a lot of regulations and standard setting bodies that are still sort of, triangulating their sort of true north on what buyers should be thinking about. And I think that's forcing people to sort of sit on the sidelines until they don't have to. So one that would be useful is if we could sort of push through that stuff, disclosure requirements, and just get them out into the public realm, get the comment periods over with, and let's just go. And then the other thing is, what a lot of buyers are nervous about is not being able to do the diligence, and they're nervous about getting accused of greenwashing or getting accused of buying something that ends up having a leakage event or so. Finding a way for governments to support sort of the insurance of those products, I think would be useful. And then the third thing, just coming from a bank's perspective, I think you'd appreciate this, is we have to find ways for governments to support the development of financial products to move these markets forward, right? Like banks are not actually set up to just drive startups to success. That's not what we're built on. It doesn't support our shareholder commitments. It doesn't support our stakeholder commitments. It doesn't. So we want to do this stuff, but we can't do it at scale without government support, a little bit of first loss capital, and some understanding of how frameworks are going to work. And I think, actually, we were talking about it before, I think we're going to hear something from the CFTC today, which should actually be useful in this conversation. And so I'm looking forward to that announcement.
Great, thanks. Yes, sir.
Thank you. My name is Tom Schroeder, and I'm with EDF Trading. I think Mark already answered your question there, Brian, so a comment and a question from my side. First of all, I think government-backed claims in the carbon space and in the climate area writ large are definitely super important, and an important example I want to give is Australia, where I recently moved from. The Climate Active Scheme has been around since 2010, actually. It used to be called the National Carbon Offset Scheme. It's currently under consultation because up until this point, it was still possible for fossil fuel companies to sell carbon neutral fuel, which is now being weeded out to get rid of all the greenwashing and so forth. So that's a good example to look at what's happening there, and I'm sure there is some alignment with what you guys are doing. And my question is now more in relation to how you as VCMI cooperate or distance yourselves or align yourselves with the SBTI, with what you're doing right now, especially with regards to your Scope 3 flexibility guidance, which I think is a great idea, but is this supposed to complement what they're doing? Are you trying to compete with them? Sorry, a bit of a thorny question.
That's perfectly right. Just on the point about Climate Active, in Australia, we have a group of 50 countries in a working group that we work with, and so we have consulted with the Australian government and the Climate Active team on that, because, as I said in the previous question, if, you know, I'm careful about what I say here, because when I was one of the founders of Vera, and when I got shown the video from 2007, when I said, in 10 years' time, this will be obsolete and redundant because there will be climate policy everywhere, and 16 years later, we're still here. But I hope that VCMI becomes superseded because governments put joined up, consistent international regulations in place that encourage the market and, you know, put some real teeth behind the regulation. As far as SBTI is concerned, the carbon integrity silver, gold and platinum claims we launched and are now available are absolutely consistent with everything SBTI says, but it goes above and beyond companies meeting their targets. What's perhaps different is that with SBTI targets, you have a target for 2030, 2035. We're saying we want people to start buying carbon credits now and make carbon integrity claims in 2024, 2025, 2026. So it's different, it's not inconsistent. With the Scope 3 flexibility claim, I've made it so very clear this is a beta claim. Because there are methodological challenges, and this is to do with 2024 and 2025, how do I know if a company is on track to meet its 2030 target or not? Because no company has a straight downward line. So we need to work together with SBTI, Greenhouse Gas Protocol and others to work out how can we do that objectively as possible. We have metrics around, you know, whether executives are remunerated based on climate performance, CapEx and OpEx and so on, but they're all proxies for that. So we need to work together with SBTI and the others to work that out. And in the process of doing that, work out is the amount of flexibility, the right one? How do we frame that as a pathway to the higher ambition targets? That's, you know, the announcement that Lucy talked about we had this morning was kicking off that process, that roadmap of converging, coming together to sort out those problems. And then, yeah, we'll have a really consistent framework in 2024.
Great, thanks. I think I saw a hand up in the back there. Yeah.
Diego from Pachama. We're working on technologies for DMRV for forest carbon. Good to see you all. A question for Antti. You guys released last year a pre-issuance credit. Is that right? Or like a way for allowing companies to do prepayments into carbon projects. So I was curious, how is that going? And maybe a question for you, Brian, is that something that you guys are interested in? And question for Mark, how that is going to go in terms of making claims of prepayments, which I already asked you in another panel, but as you guys know, for both nature and technology removals, we need pre-finance. It takes years for these projects to actually verify carbon removals. So curious, how is that going?
Thank you. Yeah, in an increasing number, we are seeing advance market commitments, and they are longer and they are more profound. So all of that is going to the right direction. Too slowly, yes, but still it is happening. So a very small fraction of those commitments that we've seen in our ecosystem were prepaid. And the digital asset pre-cork was for that purpose only. We realized that it created more sort of misunderstandings and hassle than clarity. So now it's all about offtake agreements that we, basically, help our suppliers create. But that's it. So yeah, it's a core focus area for us within our supplier funding team, or the ones that are sort of helping offtakes happen.
Thanks for the question, Diego. Good to see you. Of course, we're interested in it. I think one of the things that needs to be understood is a lot of those purchase agreements are relatively small. And so we have to be able to do these things at scale. And so we need, again, when we talk about, I was just saying this before, about some type of sort of financial vehicles that are new or different or somehow designed specifically for this market and where it is right now. We need, like, project developers need actually the finance, right? It's probably not the buyer so much. The project developers need the finance. They're going to get that finance on the back of offtake commitments. But we need significant pooled offtake agreements to be able to underwrite a significant loan that, like, at least where JP Morgan would play in a financing stack. And so that is really important as we find either the right player or the right vehicle to consolidate that type of demand. But then as an underwriter, we need to underwrite not only the project developer and their ability to produce a project and all the due diligence behind the technical aspects of the project, but also the buyer pool. And so this is where products like insurance can come in and start helping to support these types of transactions. But we need them to get a little bit bigger. And so I kind of go back to the point I was making before. It still is an issue of demand. And if we don't have the right level of demand, then we'll never get the scaled products that this market needs to really sort of make it move forward. By the way, I know I sound relatively cynical. I don't mean to sound that way. I am a believer in this market and what it will do, but we need to get it to the right place, and it just isn't there yet.
So just very quickly about the forward purchase agreements. One of the core design principles as VCMI, as I said the other day, is we reward and recognize achievements, not just commitments, because we know that there are many, many commitments and not all of them get delivered upon. So, this is what many companies have said to us. We need to be able to distinguish ourselves from those who are not doing the right thing, recognize what we've done, not what we promise we'll do. Now, what you're talking about is something that falls between the two. You've signed a contract for something that's going to happen in the future. If it's a new technology particularly, that contract is really important in giving the confidence to the provider to drive it forward. So we're going to work on that next year. How can we recognize contractual obligations, and money has been put on the table, but the delivery of the reductions may not be for 3, 5, 7 years. And we need to think, how do we do that in a way that's credible, that you're not sort of paying a penny in the pound and then getting a whole lot of credit for it, but at the same time recognizing that you're putting real money, which is going to drive things forward.
Great, thanks. I think we have time for one last question, and then we'll wrap it up here. Yep.
Just to piggyback on Diego's question, I think what is sometimes missed in the sort of...
Sorry, could you introduce yourself first?
Oh, Nathan Truitt from the American Forest Foundation. What's sometimes missed in the dissection of these sort of disasters of quality that get on the front pages is it's actually linked to this issue of how to finance a project. Because, Brian, if you tell me the way I need to finance a project, I need to go get a whole bunch of offtake agreements, right? Well, those offtake agreements are going to commit me to a very specific amount of supply at a very specific price. But if I'm engaging in a nature-based project, the baseline, in order to meet all the core carbon principles, right, robust quantification, true additionality, is not going to be something I can control. It's something that I'm going to measure through some sort of proxy measurement. And so the project is going to be inherently uncertain, which has both an upside and a downside. It could do better than we think or worse than we think. That's what true quality means, is that we're measuring it ex post. By definition, I cannot say how many credits that project is going to create. And if I say that I can, how can that possibly be high integrity? So what is the financial mechanism that is going to allow actors to enter the marketplace, to make investments, but to take on the risk, which also has an upside, associated with a true high integrity project? That's what it seems to me we're missing.
Yeah, a couple thoughts. One, I think certainly understand that concept. I think we don't look at that differently from any other investment you make, right? If you're building a factory and you say you can produce a widget, how many you can produce in any given day will determine the economics of that project. So, like, one of the questions is, am I underwriting the project itself, or am I underwriting sort of your balance sheet as an entity and a project developer? And I think that's one of the sort of core issues of where the market is right now, where we're still stutter stepping, is a lot of project developers are either startups or, sort of are coming out of the not-for-profit space and get it, but they don't really have a balance sheet to underwrite. And so what you need to get to underwriting is the demand, the revenue in the future. And so those commitments from the buyers are really what we're ultimately underwriting, is the payments they're willing to make. And so I agree with you, but that's what like buffer pools are for, and why like we have to trust that the registries and the methodologies are going to support the production of those credits. It's possible that they fail, but that's the risk you take as an underwriter, and I think that we understand that. It's just we don't yet have large enough transactions happening that at least banks of our scale are able to like really focus on them. This is happening. It's starting. It just isn't at the place it needs to be at.
Yeah, just briefly, and this may be simplistic, but typically in our framework we advise the suppliers only to commit to a certain percentage of their assumed output, so they have a fairly good idea of when and how much is going to happen, and therefore they can only do, let's say, 50% or 60% of the expected output, and the rest is then the upside. So if they can get off the ground with this 50-60%, and there's still likely to be room to sell in spot prices, which are likely to better than the current sort of offtake prices. So that's actually a beneficial sort of formula for that. And just one perhaps a note. We've just I guess this or last week, which I don't know how these weeks go without the weekends. Anyway. We just announced that we offer a sort of a seniority service for the buyer. So the buyer can negotiate with the supplier that they will be the first ones to get the delivery, and that will probably command a premium price. But at the same time, it's something that will get the stuff, or increase the probability of getting the delivery in the first place for that buyer.
Oh, that's great. That's super interesting. I think in the interest of time, we'll leave it here. I mean, lots of innovation happening in the market. Definitely, a lot happening on the integrity side, a lot still needed on the integrity side, but we're building there, and lots of innovation on digital infrastructure. So exciting times. I know some of our panelists have to run, but I think some can stick around if there's informal conversations that folks want to have after the panel. So thank you all for joining, and thank you to our panelists for taking your time to join.